Share via email. Report story. Chapter 11. His room was still dark as the curtains were drawn, so Izuku had to blink a few times to get used to the dimness after waking up to the sun's early brightness. The hand that had yanked him into the room had released him, so he took a moment to rub his eyes and clear his head. When he removed his fists from his eyes, he gasped and stumbled backward as 7 pairs of eyes stared back at him, filled with curiosity. "How did you guys get in here?" Izuku gasped in surprise. "You left your key on the floor, you damn idiot," Bakugo said without hesitation as he examined his fingernails with apparent disinterest. What are you guys doing here?" Izuku tried and failed to avoid stuttering as all 7 of the boys in his room turned to him and smirked. "Isn't it obvious?" Iida said darkly from the corner of the room. "Obvious. Man, you really are so stupid," Bakugo muttered. Izuku crossed his arms and frowned, gazing at the group of boys assembled there. For some reason, Todoroki, Iida, Bakugo, Kaminari, Shiro, Kirishima, and even Tokiyami were standing in Izuku's room, staring at him. He had a sneaking suspicion as to why. Well, it isn't really normal for a group of guys to sneak into someone's room and call the owner of the room names. Izuku retorted to Bakugo's tone, starting to feel defensive. Bakugo snorted and finally looked into Izuku's eyes before quickly going back to pick at his nails. "Well, it isn't normal for a good friend, who you thought you knew well, to sneak off after a distressing event and sleep with the girl who went through the said distressing event," Iida yelled at Izuku, standing up suddenly, his face lit up with anger. Izuku's jaw dropped almost comically as he took in his friend, who was nearly shaking in his anger. Izuku put his hands up and shook his head violently. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You guys are taking a pretty big jump to conclusions. That is not what happened last night." "Really? Then explain, Midoriya. What did happen? Why were you on the couch, cuddling up next to her this morning?" Iida said, his eyes glittering. Izuku had never seen Iida this angry. He decided rather quickly that he hated every second of it. "Yeah, Midoriya, tell us what happened." Kaminari piped up from the corner of the room, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "I honestly didn't think you had it in you. I'm curious." Kaminari laughed as he was pummeled with half-hearted punches and angry glares. Izuku blushed so hard he thought his face was on fire. "Iida, I promise nothing happened. Uraraka was sick and scared, so when I found her throwing up in the bathroom last night, I tried to make her feel better by covering her with some blankets from my room. When I tried to leave, she asked if I would hold her while she slept so that she wouldn't feel so scared. I would never do anything violating to Uraraka. Ever." Izuku said, putting every ounce of truth he had into that statement. The two boys stared at each other for a few moments before Ida finally relaxed. Oh, thank God. I hated putting up that angry facade, but I needed you to see how serious the consequences of your actions would have been if something like this had actually happened. Iida said, sitting down and wiping his brow with a sleeve. Izuku blinked a few times, his face a picture of his dumbfounded confusion. What? I didn't think that you actually did anything to Uraraka, Iida said. But I found you asleep together on the couch this morning and I worried about what might have happened. I am sorry for jumping to such drastic conclusions. The whole room seemed to relax as Izuku's face broke into a smile, the words finally starting to sink in promoted stories. You'll also like, not all heroes wear capes. Some just have 8.42.8K 1.4 kilo. Everybody. This is a suicidal, depressed Deku book with Dadmic. Will their bond grow? Will Mike fuck up? Will Izuku try to kill himself? Find out yourself. Number 1 radio. Own fluke a day 112K 8.2 kiloamperes. Collection of short ohm fluke over 365 days. Please check the second book for the rest of the day's update. Free. Oni shots 149K 3K. This is a collections of free X readers. Requests on this are now closed. I am. Sequel of UR check mark 69.4K 1.8K. This book is the sequel of You Are So Better. Read that first before going here. Tears of joy, tears of joy. Thank you to that one reader that suggested this title. I can't see you sad face, but thank you. Her prince from the underworld, half demon is. 0.25.9K 450. It's basically the same story as my succubus Momo X Deku story. I know. Real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Zero Deku Onishots 31.5K 798. Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued, unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Convicted Hearts 3680. Like my other story, but ILI longer. I'm sorry for scaring you guys. I promise it was nothing. Izuku blushed but felt his shoulders relax and his face fall into a more natural expression. Still, Zero said with a smirk. You got to sleep next to a girl. How did that feel? Oh, I don't want to. Oh, come on. You have to. Izuku was cut off as Kaminari piped up again. Yeah, Midoriya. Live a little. What was it like? Kirishima asked. We shouldn't press an investigation. You guys, Iida said. Izuku shot him a grateful look, but unfortunately, even Todoroki cut him off. Nothing crazy, Midoriya, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't curious. But you have a girlfriend. Wouldn't you know what this is like already? Kaminari. You also have a girlfriend. Jiro, and Kirishima, you were with Kachan. What is all the hype for? It is true that I have Momo, Todoroki began. But this was your first time being this close to a girl. We want to know how you felt. Izuku scratched the back of his head nervously and blushed beet red again. This is the closest you have ever been with Uraraka, isn't it? Kaminari asked. Silence answered him. My money is actually on that this is not the first time he has been close to Uraraka, Siro said with an even wider smirk. Nothing crazy. Izuku nearly yelled in his embarrassment. But, we have kissed before, he said, rubbing the toe of his shoe into his carpet. What, really? Four of the boys yelled in excitement and surprise. Even Todoroki and Tokiyami looked at him in surprise. Bakugo was the only one of the group who did not react other than a shocked glance in Izuku's direction. That wasn't crazy either. It was just a quick kiss that I gave her in the hospital. Izuku paused and gave a shuddering breath as the memory repeated in his mind. When I thought I was going to lose her. Izuku glanced up at his friends. All of the smiles were gone now, sympathy and sadness glittering in their eyes. Eyes. You guys wanted to know how it felt to be by Ochako's side last night. Izuku asked, reverting to her first name. It felt safe and calming. I was so panicked by that villain attack, by the near loss of this special person in my life that I, yes, care very deeply for, and the fact that I almost couldn't save her. Both of us needed last night, to remember and to forget. Izuku said, still staring at the floor. Silence met his confession, but after a few moments Kaminari spoke up again. Midoriya, when we asked you how it felt to sleep next to a girl, we don't mean for you to give us your life issues. The lightning hero joked. The atmosphere fell into one of relaxed happiness again, but a silent weight hung over the boys as they continued to ask Izuku questions and play games amongst themselves. Izuku was finally able to excuse himself when he got a text from his mother and was able to convince his friends to leave so that he could call her. Once they were gone, Izuku slumped against the door with a heavy sigh. What a day. Meanwhile, on a different floor. Uraraka, I swear. Spill the beans. Who knew you were so damn stubborn? Mina danced around a flustered Ochako, her arms waving around in excitement. Ochako covered her face in embarrassment, her pinkies raised to keep herself from floating to the ceiling. We don't want to force her into anything, Suyu said from beside Ochako, placing a comforting hand on Ochako's shoulder. Yes, we do. She has to tell us everything. She slept with a boy. Mina squealed. No, 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 I did not. We slept on the couch together, but nothing happened. Ochako's face was an even brighter red now, the color reaching her ears and spreading down her neck. Well, we wouldn't know, would we? Details. Mina said, spinning in place almost like an excited puppy. I don't want to make you too embarrassed, Uraraka, but even I have to admit that I am curious to hear how this happened in the first place, Momo said from the back of the room. Ochako peered between her fingers at her classmates, her eyes meeting each of their hopeful faces as she scanned the room. Finally, she loosed a breath and lowered her hands until they fell to her sides. All right, I will explain. Mina looked like she was about to have a heart attack in her excitement, and even the other girls smiled and glanced at each other. It is not that interesting. Nothing happened between us as I stated earlier, but I could not sleep. I came down to the kitchen last night for a snack and some water but just ended up getting sick. I was in the bathroom throwing up when Deku showed up. He was really nice. He just talked to me and held my hair back. When I was finished, he picked me up and brought me to the couch to sleep. He was such a comforting presence that I felt cold loneliness when he tried to leave. I asked him to stay, and what you saw this morning was the result, Ochako said, still not looking her friends in the eyes. Mina really did squeal this time. Her eyes wide and her hands were balled into fists that were placed beneath her chin. Ochako felt the flames in her cheeks flare up again, and she had to really fight the urge to cover her face again. That's so adorable. I have to admit that is rather sweet. Momo pointed out. I am just glad that you were able to get some sleep last night, Ochako, Suyu said with a small nod. We were all really worried about you. The other girls nodded in agreement, Mina still gushing and prancing around Ochako's bedroom. Suddenly, Ochako's phone buzzed. Ochako went to pick it up when Mina snatched it away from her. Ooh, it's Midoriya. Ochako's heart beat a fraction faster than normal. He says he wants to meet with you, Uraraka. Didn't anyone ever tell you that it is rude to read someone else's text messages? Momo asked with an annoyed glare, grabbing the phone from Mina and handing it back to Ochako. But if he does want to meet with you, I guess we should give you two some space. The creation hero turned and nodded to her fellow female classmates and made her way to the door. The rest of the girls followed her out, Mina and Toru giving her a thumbs up on their way out. Ochako shut the door behind them and slid down to the floor. She felt as if she had just been forced to run a mile. What a day. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Izuku paced back and forth in his room, waiting for Ochako to knock on his door. He had spoken to his mother on the phone and had decided to ask Ochako for a small favor. His hands felt sweaty and his breathing was rough and quick, but he really didn't know why. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his nerves. Why was he so nervous? He jumped as a soft knock sounded from his door. Izuku took a deep breath and strode to the door, forcing his hands to keep from shaking. He opened the door and immediately felt his nerves melt away into nothing. Ochako smiled sheepishly at him from her place in his doorway, her eyes gleaming with shy happiness. Ochako. Ochako looked up at Izuku in surprise. He had been using her first name more and more lately, but it was still new to her. Hello. Deku. What did you want to talk to me about? Izuku stepped back so as to allow her to step into his bedroom and shut the door behind her. She walked up to the sliding doors, which were open, and stopped at the railing of his balcony, watching the bustle of the city in the distance. Izuku watched her for a little bit before walking up beside her, resting his elbows on the railing and following her gaze to the city. Thank you for last night. Izuku looked at Ochako, his eyes mirroring his surprise. She continued facing the city, swallowing slowly. Are you sure you are okay with what happened? Izuku said, I know nothing serious happened, but I want to make sure that I did not make you feel uncomfortable last night. He scratched the back of his head and looked down at his shoes. He looked up when he felt a soft, warm hand on his arm, a feeling that sent little sparks through his veins and electrified his bones. Last night was the most comfortable I've felt in a long time. Izuku. Her eyes sparkled with the tears that were threatening to spill over onto her cheeks. Thank you for everything. Izuku smiled, feeling his own tears getting ready to fall. He placed one of his scarred hands on top of the hand she had on his arm, releasing a slow breath into the warm morning air. Thank you, Ochako, for last night as well. She nodded at him and the two teens faced the city again, still holding hands. Is that all you wanted to talk to me about? Oh, Izuku brightened and faced Ochako again. I can't believe I forgot. My mom called and told me that she was going on a little trip with a few of her friends this weekend and asked me to come home to house sit while she is gone. I asked her if I could have a friend over and she said yes. So if you are comfortable with it, would you like to stay with me this weekend? The sweat had started to build up again and it took almost all of his energy to keep his voice from shaking as he suddenly realized what he was asking. He tried to convince himself that it was just like any other normal sleepover with friends, but in his heart, he knew that there was a significant difference this time. Ochako opened her mouth in slight amazement before breaking into a smile. That sounds like so much fun. Of course, I'd love to stay with you this weekend. Let me text my parents, but it should be okay. Izuku felt all of his muscles relax and he loosed a breath that he didn't even know he had been holding. He smiled at her. Perfect. Just let me know what they say. Of course. Chapter 12. Ochako stared up at the plain, unassuming door that she knew belonged to Izuku Midoriya. Her heart was racing and her palms were sweaty, but she was excited. She wanted to stay with him this weekend as they used to, hanging out and making snacks while binging a show like Criminal Minds or Sherlock Holmes, trying to guess what happens by using crazy theories to come up with the most outrageous solutions. This time, she could feel it was different, but she wanted to make this trip with him feel as normal as possible. Taking a deep breath to boost her resolve and wiping her hands on her pants, Ochako stepped up to the door and knocked. It only took a few moments before a beaming Izuku stood in the doorway, his hair even messier than usual and his eyes bright with excitement. You're here. Izuku exclaimed, moving to the side and motioning with his hand toward the inside of his home. Ochako smiled back at him, her nervousness forgotten, and strode past him and into the house. She looked around as she stepped into a narrow hallway that opened up towards the back into what she assumed was the kitchen area. The floors were made up of smooth wooden planks that ran the length of the house in neat vertical lines, while the walls simply complemented the space with a cream paint color. She peered down the hallway and immediately spotted Izuku's room, which was labeled with a large sign in the shape of All Might's hair, followed by a door that she assumed was the bathroom. Izuku walked up beside her and leaned down with his hand extended. Would you like me to take your things? Ochako smiled down at him and took a step back, bowing lavishly. I thank you, my lord, for this outstanding service. Izuku bowed back without hesitating, a smile teasing the corner of his lips. Anything for the queen. He then scooped up her bag and jacket before trotting off down an extension of the hall to drop it off in her room. He came back a moment later, finding Ochako in the living room. It isn't much, but it's home, Izuku said with a satisfied nod. It's perfect, Ochako said, spinning in a slow circle around the living room before plopping down on the couch. She sighed and ran her fingers over the soft couch cushions, relaxing fully into the comfortable seat. So, what should we do now? Ochako asked, glancing at Izuku who was watching her with a bright smile. Let me think. Blank. Underscore 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 underscore. Their clothes lay scattered all over the floor. The room was dimly lit and the curtains were drawn, the nearby streetlights casting weak golden rays into the dark room. The blankets were rumpled and the pair were comfortably snuggled up to one another. Wow, that was fantastic. I know, right? That was really fun. I'm glad you liked it. I was a little worried you'd be disappointed in me. Izuku. Ochako turned to her friend and raised her eyebrow. I would never be disappointed in you just because you choose a bad movie. I'm happy just to hang out with you. But this movie was not a disappointment at all. I can't believe I've never seen that. Izuku smiled and winked at her. Good, I'm glad you liked it, Ochako. Izuku yawned and stretched his arms above his head, groaning as his joints popped. I'm exhausted though. Think it's time for bed. Ochako nodded. She was a little worried about tonight, especially since she was sleeping in a new place, but she had faith that she could be comforted by Izuku's presence alone, even if they were in different bedrooms. Yeah, I'm pretty tired too. Ochako stood up, stretching her arms as well, her pajama shirt riding up to reveal a little bit of her waist, before rolling her shoulders and bending down to help Izuku up. Izuku took her hand and pulled himself up, stumbling back a little and brushed off his pants. All right, so. We do not have a guest bedroom and my mom's bed isn't the most comfortable, so you can stay in my room if you want. Don't worry. I've cleared out most of the All Might memorabilia for you, so it shouldn't be too overwhelming. Izuku rubbed the back of his head and glanced at the floor again, his cheeks gaining more of their ever present red hue. Thanks, Deku. But you really don't have to give up your space for me. I am fine sleeping in an uncomfortable bed. It can't be that bad, can it? No, I insist. You are not causing any trouble by being in my room. I've already put your stuff in there anyway. Ochako shook her head but smiled at him. Thanks, Deku. They stared at each other for a moment until Ochako broke the silence, blushing. All right. Well, I better go get ready. Izuku nodded and gave her a small wave. Good night. Good night. The pair parted ways as Ochako headed into Izuku's room for the night. When she walked in, She was amazed at how much he had removed for her, but the wall paint color, bed sheets, and wall art still screamed Izuku's name with the bright All Might theme. Even dumbed down, it was still kind of an attack on the senses, but it was so him. She quickly got used to it and grew more comfortable in the space. She went to bed that night feeling a little less disturbed than usual. Blank, underscore, blank. The scream tore Ochako from her sleep so abruptly that she hit the back of her head on the headboard behind her when she sat up, jolting into a sitting position like a spooked rabbit. She had not been in a deep sleep, but she had been in a deeper sleep than in the past few weeks, so being shocked into a waking state like this left her disoriented and frightened. Ochako shot out of bed and nearly blasted through the door, racing to the kitchen where she found a large kitchen knife in a knife block on the counter. She whipped around and bolted to Inko Midoriya's room, knife raised over her head. She shoved open the door and stumbled into the room in her haste to get through the doorway. Her head whipped from side to side, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Her eyes finally made their way to the bed where she saw Izuku. The green-haired boy was flailing around, his arms raised into the air like a cat when it falls off of a railing, and his legs had long ago kicked the blanket to the floor. His breathing was panicked and his mouth was open in a frozen O shape. It would have seemed almost comical had it not been for the fear coursing through Ochako's veins. Ochako slowly began to approach him when he screamed again. The sound sent an ice-cold shower down her spine, but this time she actually heard the word that was interlaced with that scream. Ochako. Ochako abandoned all precautions and raced to his side. He screamed her name again as she reached him, unaware that she was right beside him. She could see the sweat beading on his face, the color drained from him like a blank canvas. She tried calling out his name first, but when he did not answer, she climbed onto the bed near his feet and climbed on top of him. Grabbing his shoulders, she shook him as hard as she could, her own breathing moving so fast that it burned her throat. His skin burned beneath her hands. She could even feel the heat rising from his shirtless chest. His body was feverish. It only took a few seconds before his eyes fluttered open, those bright green eyes full of worry and blinding white fear. She barely had time to release him and move back a little bit before he pounced on her. Ochako squeaked in surprise as his arms wrapped themselves around her body and pulled her as close to him as possible. Ochako felt the knife that had still been latched in her hand drop to the floor with a dull thud. Izuku buried his face in her neck and one of his hands found their way to the back of her head, grasping her hair and rocking her back and forth. Ochako just sat there stunned as Izuku rocked her, sobbing into her hair. After a short while, Izuku sat back, his hands placed on her shoulders so that he could just look at her. His eyes roved all over her face, the intense worry and love in them making Ochako squirm. Deku, are you? She couldn't even finish her sentence as he leaned in and kissed her. His lips were sweet and soft but contained an intenseness that took Ochako's breath away. They fit on hers like the perfect puzzle piece, and even though she was surprised beyond belief, she allowed all other thoughts to melt away and let her instincts take over. Ochako closed her eyes and savored the taste of him on her mouth. Suddenly, his warmth was gone and she had to put in real effort to avoid letting out a disappointed sigh. She opened her eyes and saw that Izuku was still holding her shoulders, but he was avoiding looking at her face now. He was shaking and his skin was still heated above normal, but even in the darkness, she could tell that the color had come back into his face. I'm sorry, oh Ochako. I don't know what came over me. I just had this horrible dream, but it wasn't real and I was just so relieved that I. Now it was his turn to be cut off mid-sentence as Ochako leaned in and kissed him back with the same passion as before but more ferocity. Izuku fell back onto his elbows as he released her shoulders and allowed himself to be overtaken by her kiss. They both closed their eyes as Ochako leaned into her actions. After a few moments, Izuku decided to take charge again and leaned forward, pushing Ochako back a little bit so that she was sitting on Izuku's knees. Ochako sat back a little and uncrossed her legs to wrap them around Izuku's waist, pressing her chest against his. Taking into account this new development, ignoring all doubts, Izuku tentatively inched his tongue out of his mouth and touched Ochako's lips in a hesitant question. Her answer was clear as day when she opened her mouth without hesitation. allowing him in. Their tongues were clumsy and hesitant at first, but as the pair grew more lustful, they developed a rhythm that evolved into an elaborate dance. One of Izuku's hands held her steady at the back of her head while the other found the way to Ochako's hip, his thumb tracing little loops on the skin that had revealed itself at the base of her thin nightshirt. Ochako was on fire, her skin burning with passion and her veins alight with her own self-kindled flame. Izuku felt like lightning, the electricity generated from their passion causing every hair to stand up on his body as it raced through his bones and down to his very core. He felt like he could run forever at the speed of light. His body felt light and airy as if he were floating on fluffy clouds in the sky. Following his heart, Izuku decided to intensify the feeling of heat and electricity between them by activating One for All. Green streaks of lightning skittered across his skin, lighting it so that a dim green glow was cast around the room. He did not use the power behind One for All, he just created a little static between him and Ochako. Izuku's electricity, both from his quirk and the kiss, kindled Ochako's flame into a roaring inferno, scorching her inside and out. To others, the kiss may have seemed like something simple, innocent, sweet, but to this pair of young heroes, the kiss was everything they were and who they wanted to be. The kiss flushed out their fears as they poured themselves into every movement and every stroke of their tongues. It represented their frustrations and their longing and their comfort around each other. It displayed their relief to finally find peace. Izuku and Ochako simultaneously rose up on their knees, their bodies pressed against one another and their limbs tangled together as each person tried to hold their partner as close to themselves as possible, afraid to let go. The moment passed after both an eternity and a third of a second, both heroes in training craving more but also a little overwhelmed. The pair broke apart and sat in silence, their heavy breathing being the only sound that filled the room. They waited, their eyes meeting for a brief moment before darting away to look at the blankets or the floor. Ochako suddenly cleared her throat. Well, that was interesting. Was it a bad kind of interesting? No. It was. It was. Ochako cleared her throat again. Incredible. Izuku smiled in the darkness and moved a little closer to her. I am really sorry about all of this. I didn't even ask you, and I just kind of jumped on you when all you were trying to do was help me out of a scary situation. I know you just told me you liked it, but I hope I didn't make you too uncomfortable with all of this. Was I moving too fast? Ochako shook her head. I have wanted to truly kiss you ever since you kissed me for the first time back in the hospital. We've both just been really busy and a lot of traumatic things happened all at once. I have been such a mess for the past few weeks that I didn't think you'd be comfortable being with someone who was basically the walking dead during the daytime with how little sleep I get at night, she said. Izuku swallowed loudly and moved even closer to Ochako. I, uh, had a dream about that night with the villain. Where you almost didn't make it. I had a dream where I did lose you. Where I couldn't do anything, and even though I could feel how close you were to coming back to me, you were just out of reach. This dream scared me so badly. It is the dream I've been having consistently for the past few weeks, that when you shook me awake and I saw that you were alive and well, I just had to hold you close to me. I had to prove to myself that this part, you being here and healthy, was not part of the dream. Izuku was now close enough to look Ochako in the eyes despite the darkness of the very early morning. Once I was 100% sure that your heartbeat was not my imagination. I realized at that moment that I could not let another moment pass where I let my doubts control me. That I could not let another moment pass by where I hesitated and missed the chance to do something with you that I almost lost entirely. You may be alive now, but for those few minutes, you were gone, and it was for those few minutes that my brain went through not only every moment we've ever had together, but also all of the things in the future that I was sure would never happen. Izuku was glad for the darkness as he blushed a deep red that could only be rivaled by red hot lava. Things like hanging out with you, kissing you, going out on dates with you, possibly getting married someday, Izuku gulped. Having children with you, rising through the hero ranks with you by my side. It is because of this sharp realization, that hit me harder than a bus, that I gained the courage to kiss you. I could not let another moment go by without letting you know how I feel, and at that moment, I don't think words would have done the trick. Ochako turned her body to fully face Izuku and raised her hand to cup his cheek. Izuku hesitated but soon did the same. Izuku, do not apologize for anything tonight. We have both been through a rough time these past few weeks, and although that would not normally be a proper excuse for a surprise kiss on a girl, I believe that our relationship goes beyond that. We had connections way before this villain turned up. The traumatic event just gave us the courage to act on our buried emotions. I am so grateful to have you in my life. You have always given me the strength to fight. Hell, you are the reason I was able to hold up against that villain for so long. I just kept thinking about you, how you would think in that kind of a situation, how you would solve my kind of problem. But I also pictured your dazzling smile and your kind face, along with the encouraging words that you always give me that mean so much to me despite probably being small and insignificant to you. Living through that torture would have been a lot more difficult without you. Even in the, even in the darkness, Ochako could tell that Izuku was crying. Dropping his hands from her cheek, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her into a sweet but firm embrace. He was still shaking from earlier, but it had been reduced to almost nothing and his breathing was a lot more steady. Ochako, you are the strongest person I know. I could not have gone through half of the stuff you did without caving or giving up. You are a flame that never burns out, holding your torch up high no matter how strong the blizzard around you gets. I could never do something like that. Although I am honored, I did not help you survive. You helped yourself by remaining true to who you are. You are the brightest flame in my life, and I will fight to protect you from those howling winds for the rest of my life. Now it was Ochako's turn to blush. She buried her face into his chest, his skin warm to the touch and his breathing a soothing rhythm that calmed her fluttering heartbeat. I love you, Izuku. Izuku's breath caught and Ochako felt her mind cringe, fearing the worst. I love you too, Ochako. I always have and I always will. The pair released each other and looked at each other for a few seconds longer before Izuku crawled back to the back of the bed. Ochako continued to sit at the foot of the bed as Izuku leaned over and unplugged his phone, turning on the screen to view the time. Well, it is 4 a.m. right now. It's time to go back to sleep, don't you think? Together. Of course, Izuku said, patting the space beside him. Ochako slowly crawled up to the spot where Izuku had motioned to and curled up there, bringing the blanket up to her chin. Izuku rolled over and curled his body around hers, his hand snaking over the bed until he found hers. He pawed at her hand once in a silent question and Ochako opened her hand. Her hand. Their palms connected and she wrapped her fingers around his, happy to finally indulge in her feelings for the green-haired cinnamon roll. Her eyelids started to droop and exhaustion began to set in. In no time the two teens were fast asleep, small smiles teasing at the corner of their lips as they allowed all of their worries to melt away into the night. End. Where stories live. Discover now.